Okay, so you know how sometimes you glance at those ingredient lists on food packages, and it's like a whole bunch of words you can barely even pronounce?
Yeah, like it's a foreign language almost.
Exactly. Well, today we're going to dive deep into one ingredient I bet you've seen countless times, but probably never thought twice about.
Mhm.
Maltodextrin.
Maltodextrin. Interesting you should pick that one. It's surprisingly common.
Right, and it's one of those ingredients that can be a bit of a red flag once you know what you're looking for.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here for.
Exactly. This isn't about fear-mongering or anything. It's all about arming ourselves with information so we can make the best choices for our health.
Right. With
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power when it comes to what we're putting into our bodies.
So let's break it down. What exactly is maltodextrin? I'm imagining most people are picturing something very scientific and maybe a little intimidating.
Well, it's definitely a mouthful, both literally and in terms of what it actually is. Maltodextrin is a type of manufactured starch. Basically, they take larger starches, usually from corn, and break them down into smaller, more digestible sugar molecules.
Okay, so already I'm hearing sugar molecules and getting a little suspicious.
It's definitely something to be mindful of, and the process of breaking down those starches involves using acids and enzymes. It's a bit of a chemical process to transform it into that fine, powdery form you see on the ingredient list.
So even though it doesn't necessarily sound sweet, it's basically sugar disguised as something else.
Well, it's not quite that simple. You see, even though it's derived from starch and does break down into sugar molecules during digestion, it doesn't actually taste very sweet. That's one of the reasons food manufacturers love using it. It acts as a filler or thickener or even a stabilizer without really changing the flavor much.
Sneaky. But how safe is this stuff, really? I mean, you mentioned it's a manufactured ingredient, which always makes me a bit wary.
I hear you, and it's a valid concern. Maltodextrin is considered GRAS by the FDA, which stands for Generally Recognized as Safe.
However,
There's always a however.
haha, right. That GRAS classification, it basically means it's assumed to be safe because it comes from a natural source, in this case corn. But the thing is, the manufacturing process really changes the original starch, and we don't have a ton of research on the long-term effects of maltodextrin itself. It feels like that GRAS classification sometimes lets things slip through the cracks, like, oh, it's probably fine, so we don't need to study it too closely.
It's true, there's definitely room for more research there.
Absolutely. But where things get really concerning for me is maltodextrin's effect on blood sugar. I've heard it's even worse than table sugar.
You heard correctly. Maltodextrin has what we call a high glycemic index, or GI, which basically means it can cause a really rapid spike in your blood sugar after you eat it.
And we know those spikes aren't good news.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And to put it in perspective, table sugar has a GI of about 65, but maltodextrin, that can range from 110 to 136. That's a huge difference.
Wow, okay. So we're talking about a serious blood sugar bomb here. What's actually happening in our bodies when we get a spike like that?
Think of it this way. Your body is like a well-oiled machine, right? And sugar is like the fuel that keeps it running. Regular sugar is like adding fuel gradually, keeping everything running smoothly. Maltodextrin, it's like dumping a whole bunch of logs onto a fire all at once.
And then things get out of control.
Exactly. You get this huge, sudden burst of energy, or in this case, sugar, and your body has to scramble to deal with it. Your pancreas goes into overdrive, pumping out insulin to try and mop up all that excess sugar in your bloodstream. And over time, that can lead to all sorts of problems. Energy crashes, cravings, even increased risk of things like insulin resistance, weight gain, type 2 diabetes. It's not a pretty picture.
Definitely not ideal. And to make matters worse, this ingredient is a master of disguise. It hides under all sorts of different names. It's like it's trying to outsmart us in the grocery store aisles.
It's true. It's kind of sneaky. Maltodextrin can be disguised as cornstarch, modified food starch. Sometimes it's even just called dextrin on the label. You really have to be paying attention.
Okay, so we've got a bland name, a talent for hiding, and a potential impact on our blood sugar. But it gets even more interesting. When we were researching for this deep dive, we uncovered some pretty concerning facts about maltodextrin, like where it comes from and even some unexpected ways it's used.
Right, like the fact that it can be used as a horticultural insecticide.
Wait, hold on. The same stuff in our food is used to kill bugs? How does that even work?
I know it sounds strange, right? But they actually spray it on plants to suffocate soft-bodied insects. It messes with their respiratory systems and, well, you can guess the rest.
That's kind of unsettling and makes you wonder, if it's doing that to insects, what could it be doing in our bodies over time?
It's a valid question, and unfortunately we don't have all the answers yet.
Right. And there's the fact that most maltodextrin comes from genetically modified corn, which is a whole other can of worms, right?
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure. See, the vast majority of corn grown in the U.S. is genetically modified. And that means it's been treated with glyphosate, a herbicide that's been linked to some pretty concerning health issues.
And glyphosate is something we hear more and more about these days, and it's not exactly something you want on your dinner plate. Is there anything else we need to know about where this maltodextrin is coming from?
Well, there's the gluten issue. Now, corn itself is naturally gluten-free, but some maltodextrin is actually made from wheat. So that means it could cause problems for folks with celiac disease or gluten sensitivities.
It's like every time you turn around, there's another thing to be aware of. It really highlights why reading those labels is so crucial, especially with all these sugar-free and diet foods popping up everywhere. You'd think those would be a safe bet, but...
You know, it's not always the case.
Right. So how do they get away with labeling something sugar-free when it contains an ingredient that basically turns into sugar in your body?
It's all about loopholes, unfortunately. Food manufacturers are pretty savvy. See, they can legally call something sugar-free if a single serving has less than a certain amount of sugar. But what they don't always tell you is that the serving size might be tiny. Or people often eat more than one serving, which adds up quickly.
So it's misleading, like they're using these technicalities to make their products seem healthier than they really are.
Unfortunately, that's often the case.
Okay, so let's talk about where we might actually find this master of disguise lurking in our food supply. Give us a rundown. Where's maltodextrin hiding?
Get ready, because the list is long. We're talking canned fruits, sauces, salad dressings, even some of those diet snacks people grab when they think they're making a healthy choice.
I'm already sensing a theme here. Processed foods, right?
You got it. And it doesn't stop there. It's also in a lot of low-fat foods, because they need to add something to make up for the flavor and texture that's lost when they take out the fat.
Ah, that makes sense. Like those low-fat yogurts and salad dressings that claim to be healthy that have a whole paragraph of ingredients you can't even pronounce.
Exactly. And don't even get me started on the sugar-free stuff. Maltodextrin is a dream come true for food manufacturers who want to mimic the taste and texture of sugar without actually having to add any real sugar.
It's like a magic trick. But as we're learning, there's nothing magical about maltodextrin. In fact, it might be more like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's not just the usual suspects either, right? I mean, I was surprised to learn it's even in things like sports drinks.
Oh yeah, sports drinks love maltodextrin because it's absorbed really quickly, so it gives you that burst of energy, which athletes want.
Right.
But remember, we talked about those sugar spikes. Those come with a downside.
Right, not so great in the long run. And get this, the source material even mentioned infant formula and pet foods. Infant formula. That just seems wrong.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. See, they add it to infant formula because it's a source of carbohydrates and calories, which babies need. But some experts think it might be contributing to unhealthy weight gain in infants. And there's even some concern that it could mess with their developing gut microbiome, which is super important for overall health.
Okay, so now we're talking about potentially impacting the long-term health of babies. Not cool. And then there's the pet food angle. Our furry friends aren't safe from the maltodextrin craze either, huh?
Nope, it's in a lot of pet foods too. Just like with human food, it's used as a filler, a thickener, a binding agent, all those things.
Yeah.
And just like in humans, it can lead to weight gain, blood sugar spikes, and digestive issues in our pets.
Okay, so at this point, I think it's safe to say that maltodextrin is everywhere. And it's kind of overwhelming, right? I mean, what can we actually do about it? It's not like we can just avoid all processed foods altogether.
You're right. It's not about being perfect. It's about being informed and making conscious choices whenever possible. And the good news is that even small changes can make a big difference.
So where do we start? Give us the practical tips.
Well, the most impactful thing you can do is focus on eating more whole, unprocessed foods. Things like fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains, that sort of thing. Those foods give you sustained energy and tons of nutrients without those drastic blood sugar spikes.
So it's about getting back to basics, right? Choosing real food over processed whenever possible.
Exactly. And when you do buy packaged foods, take a minute to actually read the ingredient list. Don't just glance at the front of the package. Flip it over and look for those hidden sources of maltodextrin. Remember, it can be disguised under different names.
Like we talked about earlier, it's like a detective game trying to spot all the aliases.
Exactly. And another thing to keep in mind is that ingredients are listed in descending order of predominance by weight. So if you see maltodextrin listed near the top, that means it's a major ingredient in that product.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. So it's really about being proactive and paying attention, We have more power than we think, right?
Absolutely. Every time you choose a piece of fruit over a processed snack bar, every time you opt for plain yogurt with some fresh berries instead of the pre-flavored sugary kind, you're making a difference. You're voting with your wallet and supporting companies that are prioritizing real ingredients and transparency.
I love that. It's about those small, everyday wins that add up over time. But what about those times when you're craving something sweet? Are there any healthy swaps we can make?
Of course. Instead of reaching for a candy bar or a sugary drink, try opting for naturally sweet treats like fruit or dates. Even a small piece of dark chocolate can hit the spot. And if you're craving a sweet drink, try infusing your water with some fresh fruit or herbs. Or make yourself a smoothie with unsweetened almond milk, fruits, and veggies. It's a great way to satisfy your sweet tooth in a healthy way.
Those are great ideas. You know, it's interesting. We talk a lot about individual responsibility, reading labels, making healthier choices, but it feels like we're up against a food industry that's constantly trying to outsmart us.
Yeah.
Shouldn't there be more regulations to protect consumers from these misleading labeling practices?
You bring up a really important point. There's definitely a need for more transparency and stricter regulations when it comes to food labeling. The current system has a lot of loopholes and allows for misleading marketing tactics that make it really difficult for people to make informed choices.
It feels like sometimes it's profit over health, unfortunately, but
Right.
that doesn't mean we're powerless, right? What can we do as individuals to advocate for change on a larger scale?
We can support organizations that are fighting for food justice and advocating for stricter labeling laws. We can contact our elected officials and let them know that this is an issue we care about. And we can use our voices to raise awareness among our friends, family, and communities. Even just having these conversations can plant seeds and create a ripple effect.
It's about coming together as a community and demanding better for ourselves and for future generations.
Exactly. Never underestimate the power of an informed and engaged consumer. Every voice matters, and together we can create a healthier, more transparent, and just food system for everyone.
It's inspiring to hear that we can make a difference, but I imagine some folks listening might be feeling a little overwhelmed, right? Like, where do we even begin?
It's true, it can feel like a lot to process. But the good news is, you don't have to be perfect. Any step you take towards a healthier lifestyle is a win. It's not about deprivation. It's about being mindful and making choices that align with your values. Start small, focus on one meal, one snack, one grocery trip at a time. You've got this.
I love that. Progress over perfection. So as we wrap up this deep dive into maltodextrin, what's the key takeaway you want listeners to walk away with?
I think it boils down to this. Knowledge is power. The more you understand about the ingredients in your food, the better choices you can make for your health and well-being. Don't be afraid to read those labels, ask questions, and advocate for yourself.
Absolutely. Keep asking those questions, reading those labels, and never stop advocating for a healthier and more transparent food system. That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored the lurking problem of maltodextrin. Until next time, stay curious.